I came across something that really hit me this morning, and I thought it might be kind of a good frame for this episode. This is a special episode of Heroes Behind the Badge. And here's the story that I came across this morning that kind of got to me. It's 2 a.m. A patrol car rolls quietly through the dark city streets. The officer answers a dispatch for what should be the last call of his shift, a routine end to another routine night serving the community. And that community may never, ever know his or her name. He jokes with a coworker, files his last report. He grabs his coffee. He masks the exhaustion and the pain behind a practiced smile. To his team, he seems steady, maybe even invincible. But when the locker closes and the badge comes off, the weight of unspoken burdens finally settles in. By sunrise, another family is changed forever, blindsided by a tragedy that no one saw coming. And the thin blue line grows thinner and thinner in a way the headlines rarely mention. Every year, this scenario is heartbreakingly real for more law enforcement families than those touched by the line of duty deaths. That struck me, guys. That struck me. And today is a special episode of Heroes Behind the Badge. We have not one, but two subject matter expert guests. I know usually here we talk about the badge, we talk about the uniform, we talk about our heroes. But you know what? We never forget our heroes. But now imagine those silent battles that are happening right now behind closed doors. The sirens are off. The station grows quiet every single year. Believe this or not, I found it hard to believe. I did the homework on this. More law enforcement officers die by suicide than from every other line of duty incident combined. Gunfire, car crashes, assaults. This isn't just a number, guys. It's a cascade of heartbreak for families, partners blindsided, entire departments grieving a loss they never saw coming. Yeah, this is a hard topic to talk about. In fact, sometimes, I've never been a sworn law enforcement officer, but I have been around law enforcement my whole life. I have a daughter who is a lieutenant in law enforcement. And I know this is a hard topic to talk about. In fact, it's been a taboo topic for many, many years. But you know what? It can't be a taboo topic anymore, okay? 184 officers take their lives on average every year, which is more than all the officers killed in line of duty fatalities. So I want to set the tone and the reason we're doing this show. One of the key core beliefs of Citizens Behind the Badge that sponsors this podcast is that we have to stop being silent about something that needs to be talked about in the open. And we have made a decision as a board to put this issue forefront, to put it front and center. And today we are blessed with two subject matter experts on these topics. Today, two guests instead of one. We haven't done that before. One new guest and one returning guest. Our new guest is Dave Howe. He's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. Today, he's representing the Comfort, Peace, and Freedom Foundation, supporting America's heroes. And beside Dave Howe, we have our own David Berez. David is a returning guest, a valued member of our Law Enforcement Advisory Council for Citizens Behind the Badge. He is the author of the book, A Resilient Life, A Cop's Journey in Pursuit of Purpose. We talked about David. We had David as a guest months ago. If you haven't got the book yet, get it, okay? I got multiple copies. I passed them to all my law enforcement friends here in the Florida area. It is a great read. It is a must read for the times that we're in right now. It is a must read. David also is a frequent op-ed contributor to our Citizens Behind the Badge blogs and posts. I am delighted to have the Davids here today. And David, of course, David Berez is a subject matter expert in positive psychology. I don't want to take any of their thunder because they are the experts, and we're just going to be asking, hopefully, some intelligent questions. But let me start with Dave Howe. I mean, we had a great discussion offline yesterday, Dave. And, I ask you point blank, I think, why do we need to talk about this? This is not a comfortable subject. It's not a subject that maybe we'd like to be talking about, but why the hell do we need to be talking about this, Dave?
Well, your description of that horrible night and how that impacted the family is certainly a great place to start the conversation and to answer your question. Clearly, the program that I'm going to introduce, and by the way, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present this new tool that's available to the law enforcement community to not just address the suicide issue that you described in the opening, but it's actually something that all people, not just in law enforcement, can benefit from, and that is to create a written plan to have a joyful life. And so that kind of program that is a new tool to put in our toolbox to help deal with the stresses of the job, which then is a contributing factor to the suicide crisis that's facing law enforcement today. And unfortunately, it's getting worse. So this is a great forum to share a way to help bend that horrible statistic into a favorable direction.
Absolutely. David Berez, I know the book documents how you feel about this whole topic. You documented it well on our podcast. I think I got the number right. Law enforcement officers are 54% more likely to commit suicide than the average population. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. And I think when we have these conversations, it's really important to set the stage and set the tone for why this is so important. And so, yes, you hit on a lot of those numbers already in your opening, your intro. And again, thank you for having me back. Thank you for letting me put part of this community, the community that you guys have built for bringing light on the issues in law enforcement, specifically this one that means so much to me of self-harm and self-destructive behaviors and ultimately suicide. So I'm grateful to share that platform with you. But yeah, 3.8 times more likely to die by suicide than killed in the line of duty. You mentioned that.
Wow.
54% more likely to die by suicide than the general public. These numbers are staggering. One thing that's been interesting, actually 2 points have been interesting for me of recent, is the average person lives about 85 years, is what the statistics say. 30 years beyond the age of 50 is actually how the scientists break that down. Right. Police officers are 7.8 years expected lifespan beyond the age of 50. Huh. So those of us here have surpassed those odds, which is awesome. I'm not quite there yet. I've got
we're trying.
I've got 7.2 years to go according to those numbers. But yeah, it's incredible to think the amount of stress that this job puts on our bodies and our minds, that these are the numbers. Mm-hmm. So with programs like that Dave is going to be talking about, and programs that I've been involved with and I have on my own, there is mitigating factors that can extend that lifespan, that can take us out of that rut, that can do all of these things. So yeah, let's push these ideas forward.
Absolutely. I know the Daves have had a chance to talk before this podcast, right? The two of you. And I'd love to hear, and I know my colleagues, Bill Erfurth. Good morning, sir. And Craig Floyd, our fearless leader, our president of Citizens Behind the Badge, founder and president. I know they're going to have a lot of questions. I would love to hear myself what you guys talked about when you spoke and what the synergies are that you see between what Dave Howe is doing and what Dave Berez is doing. Okay, let me throw it to our fearless leader, Craig Floyd, and guide us from here, sir.
Well, my first question really is to David Berez, and that is, 40 years ago, when I started the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, the only discussion anybody was having regarding police suicide was our criteria for when a name goes on the national memorial. And it very clearly stated, as the Department of Justice had already clearly established, that officers who die by suicide would not be eligible to have their names on the memorial. Their families would not get death benefits from the federal government as those that die in the line of duty would. And today, it seems like every organization, everywhere you go, people are talking about how we can bolster the mental health of officers. And I'm incredibly proud and pleased that we've been a part of that discussion and that we've gotten to this point. But I'd like you to just maybe briefly talk about what it was like when you entered your law enforcement career and what it's like today. I mean, you're a master resiliency trainer. You've got all these great ideas about how officers can deal with the stress of the job. But you wrote in your book, very courageously, by the way, that you had suicidal thoughts at the end of your career. And I'm just interested in the evolution, the beginning, and what it's like today as we deal with the issue of mental health and police suicide.
So I started in 1999 my career, and back then, just like you mentioned, mental health and suicide was not even part of the conversation, not in a good or bad way. It just wasn't there at all. So the if you were struggling, if you were having a bad day, the response was tighten your bootstraps, pull your belt up a little bit, straighten up your uniform, keep moving forward, you'll be fine. I don't know that we had the right data and the right science back then to understand what was actually happening in our brains. So in the year 2000, which is the year the year after I started in policing, uh, Dr. Marty Seligman started the idea of positive psychology. So as that science has moved forward in the last 25 years or almost 26 years, the understanding of how our brains change after its exposure to trauma has really been realized. And I don't know that we knew that before. And we're not talking about that long ago. This science is not that old. So today, now understanding that, I think we're looking at it differently and for good reason and with good results. We've lowered a lot of those rates over the years. We're lowering the barriers to getting the support and the help, which, by the way, is much stronger of an issue than stigma itself. Stigma used to be the problem. Stigma used to be the issue years ago. If you asked for help, they just took your badge and gun and you were gone. But now we're not seeing stigma. It's still there, but it's not as much of a problem. The access to the care is the problem. And we're finding ways to break down those barriers as well. So I think now that we're talking about it, now that it's more prominent and we have the tools to address it, it's becoming more acceptable because we can do something about it and you're not just crazy. So you have a medical problem. Same thing if you break your leg. If you break your leg on the job, we're not throwing you to the wolves and telling you to take a hike. Well, can't do that with a broken leg anyway. But if we have a mental problem or an emotional problem as a result of the job, it's an injury. That's why we've gone from post-traumatic stress disorder to post-traumatic stress injury, because that's exactly what it is. And at some point, if you want me to, can get deeper into the neuroscience of why we've made that change, but the change is legitimate. And I think we need to address it as an injury and not as a disorder because it can be fixed.
And Dave Howe, okay, so David Berez is starting his police career. And he's got a lot of stress ahead of him. Obviously, he's dealt with a lot of traumatic events. I think the number is what, roughly 400 to 600 traumatic events are experienced by a police officer in their career. The average citizen, maybe 2 or 3 traumatic events in their lifetime. So right away, we see that the stress of the job is tremendous. So Dave Howe, tell me about this life plan that you'd like to see officers engage in? What are the components and what would you like officers to do at the beginning, middle, and end of their careers to better adjust to that stress and those traumatic events?
Yeah, the life planning program is really for everybody. It's not just for law enforcement, or in my case, I got into this to try and bring it to the military community that is also suffering from serious mental health and horrible suicide stats. In fact, 22 members of the military community kill themselves every day. So that's over 8,000 a year and 200,000 since the War on Terror began. So, but the program was never designed to be a mental health program or to, reverse the terrible trend in suicides. That just happens to be another way that the program can be very beneficial. So, directly to your question, if you get people on a joyful path through life early, well, then they're never going to come to the fork in the road that puts them into danger that David has uh, detailed in his book, for example. So, by having a program that focuses on just how are you going to optimize your life? And it's a very simple program in that it starts with you envision what that future is going to look like. And I have people begin by looking at the end of their lives and having them document, what do you want to be known for? What do you want your obituary to say? What do you want your friends and family at your funeral to say? And then you start backward planning from the things that you want to achieve in your life to make sure that you accomplish those things in the course of your journey. And by putting the negative stressors that you've so brilliantly described today, you use that negative energy, flip it into positive energy, and put that energy into creating and sticking with and achieving the goals of the plan designed to get you to having a absolutely wonderful experience throughout your entire time on this earth.
And David, that
I
ties in nicely and is very consistent with what you've always said on this podcast and privately. And that is, instead of focusing on all the negative aspects of your life, whether it be stressful day on the job as a police officer or whatever it might be, focus on what you're grateful for. Gratitude is such an important part of the resiliency program that you espouse. Touch on that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking through the lens of positive psychology, we can build our lives from a strengths-based perspective on what is good. How do we build from a solid foundation beyond just ameliorating our problems from a psychological perspective, which is, I think, what Dave is talking about as well. We don't just need to focus on what our problems are and how do we solve those, because when we solve them, what do we do? So using things like gratitude and seeing the good parts of our lives, we can build on that foundation that Dr. Barbara Fredrickson talks about her broaden and build model. If we build a solid foundation, a wide, solid foundation, we can build up from that and use our strengths to keep moving forward. I often like to describe it as growing grass, to be honest with you. We can pull weeds all day long, but we're just leaving space for more weeds to grow. It doesn't do anything for the grass when we pull our weeds. But if we fertilize and strengthen our grass, the weeds themselves will naturally die out. Those weeds are a metaphor for our problems and the things that are ill-being in our lives. So if we strengthen and grow that grass, we don't get more weeds. We get more grass and strong grass. So gratitude is certainly one of those ways that we can do that. When we focus on the things that are good for us, we'll see more good. And I equate that often to, like, if you're driving down the highway, when was the last time you saw a purple truck? There's not a lot of them out there. But if you think to yourself for the next 30 seconds about purple trucks, guess what you're going to see the next time you drive down the highway? A purple truck. And gratitude is the same thing. If we focus on all the good things in our lives, and not just the good things that people are doing for us, our contributions to others. The more we give to others, the better we feel about ourselves, the more good we're going to do, the more good we're going to feel and see. So gratitude is a great way to build those strengths.
Could I interject and ask Bill Erfurth to get involved here? Those of you who are frequent flyers on our podcast, you know that Bill Erfurth is a 26-year veteran of the Miami-Dade Police Department, now Sheriff's Office, but it was Police Department back then. He retired as a lieutenant, highly decorated, and ran one of the top units, the TNT unit, for years inside of Miami-Dade. I want you to reflect, Billy Boy, on what the Davids both said, okay? That Dave Howe is talking about starting when you begin as a cop on this positive life thing. And of course, we all know David Berez, positive psychology. We know what he's all about. What would you be thinking as a new 21-year-old Metro-Dade cop if that was part of the curriculum?
Yeah, I think what you guys are talking about, and first and foremost, is how is this going to be implemented? Because what goes on the job day in and day out, it's pretty difficult to change what you're going to see and what you're going to experience. You hear a lot of cops say, after 25, after 30 years, I'll never be able to unsee the mayhem that I've seen. And you carry that forever. I can honestly say, so you're asking me at 21 years old. I can remember when I was 21 and 22 years old, and I can vividly see it right now of this tiny little 6-year-old girl that was hit by a hit and run driver. Her arms and her legs were twisted and contorted in every crazy way that you could see. She's laying on her back in the middle of the street. Her big brown eyes wide open, never blinked once as I was kneeling over her. I can still see that today. And I'm sitting there as a young cop thinking, holy shit, what do I do for this kid? I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here, and I'm getting on the radio, like several times I'm getting on the radio. What's the ETA on rescue? What's the ETA on rescue? Because you're not trained for that. I mean, yeah, you can do a little simple first aid and stuff, but I still see that today. And that was how many years ago? Now, does that haunt me? No, not really. Have I ever lost any sleep? You hear cops talk about, they have insomnia, they can't sleep, they have nightmares. I don't know. I never had that. Honestly, why that is, perhaps it's your upbringing, it's the way that you're raised. But we'll get into this more of this implementation of these programs with both Daves here.
But what if those programs had been available to you at 21, the program that Dave Howe has and the program that Dave Berez had, how would you have responded to that? Would you have said, this is all fluffy, this is all BS, I don't need this? I don't know. I'm just asking your opinion.
Yeah, my opinion, and honestly, yeah, you'd be like, screw that. Because back then, though, I think that like what David would say, and the mentality has changed now, and it's not quite as taboo, but it's also, you've got to understand the police culture. The police culture, just like the military culture where Dave comes, Dave was a colonel, he was, involved with those folks all the time. It's a very macho thing, and no one wants to kind of show their less than macho side, because it's almost like it's perceived as a weakness. I can tell you, it's interesting when we're in the police academy and you got to go to the morgue. So everybody's got to go to the morgue, and in some respects it's probably a good thing because it did weed out some people. But you go to the morgue, you walk in the place, it reeks like hell. There's dead people everywhere. It's like worse than Halloween.
The morgue there are, yeah.
Yeah. And so you walk in this place, and of course the medical examiner looks forward to this day because he wants to see how many people he can cause to pass out. And so now they're sawing the head open and cracking the chest open, and they want you to hand you body organs to hold in your hands and all this crazy shit. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is horrendous. But like several people fell to the sides and passed out, and other people were nauseous, and some people actually quit the academy after that because they were like, I can't deal with this.
Wow.
So maybe that's a good thing because you weeded some of those people out. Because let me tell you something, you kind of hinted on it earlier about how all these traumatic incidents, I have this conversation once in a while, and your average person, maybe you see 11 dead people your entire life, right? And those 11 dead people, they got makeup on and their lips are sewed closed and they're in the coffin laying there at a wake. Maybe you've seen a traffic accident or a violent crime, perhaps. You're talking 11 people, give or take, in your entire life. Yeah. Well, a big city cop in an urban area where there's a lot more crime, I mean, I'd see 20 dead people in a month. Right. So 20 dead people in a month times 27. I mean, do the math. So there's a lot of crazy stuff. I'll just say this and then we'll move on. I think that I was never affected like a number of people, because I had not only good upbringing as a kid, so I was solid in my thinking, but also because I was into sports.
Ah,
So the police job wasn't my world. It wasn't my number one be all
interesting.
end all kind of thing, because I can tell you there's a lot of people that's their whole life, their whole identity. That's all they care about. That's all that they associate with. They marry other cops. They never get away from the lunacy. And I had a lot of outside interests. I had media stuff going on. I had sports going on. I had a lot of different things that took me away from the daily grind of death, destruction, and despair, which is what that job brings you every day.
Hey, Dave Howe. Okay, so
Great
Bill has
answer.
just described how he's adjusted to his police career and how he wasn't affected. He never had suicidal thoughts. He's not a heavy drinker. I've been with him many times. I outdrink him every time. And the bottom line is he seems so well adjusted. Now, he didn't have a written life plan, as you're suggesting maybe officers should do. But you had an interesting take on Bill's situation when we had a private discussion. I'd like you to share why you think Bill, even though he didn't have a written life plan, maybe he still dealt with some of the same principles of what you're proposing.
Well, full disclosure, whatever the relationship is, Bill is the brother of my brother-in-law. So, there's a family connection there. And that's how I got
We
to
haven't
know.
figured out what that is. Yes.
That's a hard.
What the name of that is.
But, and as a result, and my wife is a retired deputy chief of investigations for the DuPage County State's Attorney's Office. So I've been exposed to the law enforcement community for a long period of time, and obviously getting to know someone with Bill's resume, he really was at the tip of the spear for the law enforcement community. So his stories are just so rich, so authentic, and so compelling, that he's a really remarkable guy. But the thing I really want to emphasize about what Bill just said, and hopefully it'll answer your question. If not, fill in the blanks. But Bill describes exactly why the program that I'm presenting to everyone today is really so important. Is he had a holistic view of his life. It wasn't 1,000% tunnel focused on his police career. He had all these outside interests, all these outside relationships. So he had lots of places that he could sort of dissipate some of the stress, some of that, oh my God, I can't believe what I just saw on my last shift. He had other places to sort of spread that out, as opposed to he was in a very narrow group and everybody was almost one-upping each other as to how bad of a day they had or what horrific event they had just had to deal with. So that's the purpose of the program, is to actually come up with a written plan for how you're going to have a joyful life, exactly like Lieutenant Erfurth was able to achieve without committing it to writing or anything. But he had it in his mind. Lots of people can have successful lives. I mean, it's not a requirement. I mean, Bill Gates didn't have a written plan. Steve Jobs, think of any famous successful person. But if you looked into their lives, I'll be willing to bet that their corporate plan was very detailed. There were parts of their life that was very well documented, written down, followed. Goal achievement was job number one for their day. So you don't have to do this kind of program. But one interesting statistic is studies have shown that only 1% of the population in our country actually have a written plan for their life. Yet those people that do have a written plan are 9 times more successful than those that do not have a plan.
Interesting.
So you can go forward and have a very successful life like Bill and many others have without a written plan, but you can optimize and increase your odds of having a really successful journey by doing a program similar to the one that I'm presenting to you all today.
It's very.
I'd like to add one thing to that I think is maybe contextualize that whole conversation with what Bill said, what Dave said, is to me, it comes down to one word, and it's optimism. And Bill has this natural, innate level of optimism where he, even though something bad happened to him, he turns it around as how did that happen for him? And it's not, he doesn't have this victimized mindset. So there are so many people, negativity is twice as easy to conceptualize for the individual as positivity. So I think that when somebody like Bill is innately optimistic, these things don't bother you as much or at all, even, and how you reframe them is super important. And then the other side of that, where you have the concept of the written life plan that Dave Howe is talking about, is super important because we can train optimism. We're not born as lucky as Bill to be that optimistic generally with a smile on our face all the time, but we can learn it. We can learn optimism through training. And I think that's what the plan that Dave is talking about is really, really good for. And for those people that are like Bill, what that does is it categorizes things for you so you can move forward with your innate already, the space you're already in naturally. So I think it is good for both populations, but I think it serves even better those that don't have that innate optimism that Bill has, because you can train yourself to be like that. And if we insert this in the academies early on, as Dennis originally asked, we're going to have less catastrophic outcomes on the other side of your career because you're training yourself to do this over a long period of time, and you can build up to that natural level of optimism that Bill was already speaking to.
So I want to jump back in and say, all right, before we really get into the nitty gritty of how this can be implemented, how this becomes cultural within the law enforcement culture, say, one thing that I think is important is when you are a cop, I'm going to use this term. It's called being a gore whore. And, a gore whore is basically somebody that just cannot wait to go see the death and the mayhem and the dead bodies and all this other kind of crazy shit, right? So there got to be a point in my career, maybe it was about 8 years into the job, where I said, you know what? If that isn't my call, I'm not going to that. So if it was a dead body call, and let me just clarify this. If it was a dangerous call, and you needed backups and stuff, everybody went. But if it was a traffic fatality, I remember younger in my career, I'd drive from the other side of my zone to go by the traffic fatality because I was a gore whore. I wanted to see how crazy this might be, and I got to say something, like talking about going to the morgue, when you're a young cop, at least where I worked, and I was working the day shift, I dreaded getting the dead body calls. And every morning when I'd start at 7 a.m., and since I was the rookie on this day shift squad, I would get all the frickin' dead body calls. And every day you would have to go, not every day, but you know what I'm saying. You'd have to go to these nursing homes and you'd have to walk into the nursing home because that morning the staff found another dead person, Yep. And you walk in there and the place stinks like hell. You walk in there, they've pissed themselves or they've shit themselves or whatever it is. It's horrendous, body purges when they die. But you also have to inspect the body, right? Because you have to make sure that there wasn't any wrongdoing. And if there was something that didn't look right, then you had to call homicide. If not, you just called the doctor. They signed off on it, whatever. I'm not going to get into all that. But again, every day or every other day, you're going to see some dead person. And I don't know, you just can't get away from some of that stuff. But at a certain point in time in my career, I decided that I was no longer going to just randomly go and see some horrific crime scene or see who killed their brother for the last pork chop at the dinner table and all this other crazy nonsense, right? And so you have to make that decision as a cop that you have to shield yourself and you have to have some kind of smarts about yourself psychologically to say, I don't need to see all that shit every day.
What we've heard so far are the unseen costs of service, the moments that change a life, and the silence that too often follows. But awareness is only the beginning. In part 2, we'll turn toward the question every officer eventually faces. What comes next? That conversation continues in part 2, Beyond the Badge.